Good afternoon again. This is Arthur McKeown, and now I'm talking about some of the ideas that can flow from an understanding of can-do statements, and especially how they can help with course design for pre-ESOL. I now want to say something about can-do statements to introduce them if you're not familiar with them, and then give some examples of a dozen or more that may be of value as you think about how they could be adapted or modified to suit your own teaching environment. As always, I make mention of the fairly structured elements within a typical lesson on the Belfast programme's compendium of resources for absolute beginners. Obviously, with this, I'll be thinking mainly about vocabulary. The wise man to whom I refer here is Michael Lewis, who was my boss in Sweden 40 years ago. One of his publications, Steps to English, introduced the half-dozen elements that we were able to use to make an effective lesson. This is an example of a pre-ESOL series of can-do statements, especially for absolute beginners. I'm not going to read them, but as I'm sure you'll appreciate, they are things that can be easily interpreted by adult foreign nationals. My own enthusiasm recently has been inspired by the publication of a revised version of Pearson's Global Scale of English, with some indications of how it can be used in a variety of ways. I've also made use in my thinking at the moment of teaching lexically, recently published by Delta and available in the Self-Access Centre, especially valuable for those with a particular interest in teaching vocabulary. I've also had the benefit of refreshing any vocabulary included in pre-ESOL by the work done on corpus linguistics by Tony McInerney at the University of Lancaster and the MOOC. One outcome from that was some ideas around how we could encourage an understanding of collocation among pre-ESOL learners. Consider for a moment the word driver, how productive it can be when linked with bus, train and taxi. But moving now to other can-do statements, spend a few minutes exploring the actfl.org website, where you will be able to find some useful resources on American perspectives on the topic. Look in particular at the 44-page downloadable PDF in which they spell out can-do statements for a range of different levels. Obviously, our focus is on those that are of greatest interest to pre-ESOL. Again, I remind you of how important it is to embed any teaching that we do in the familiar topics, things that are itemised but not necessarily restricted to the points on this list. That will help people see how transferable the language they're learning can be. Here is an opportunity to look at 5 slides that look at what, according to the Americans, people at novice, low level need to be able to do with their English. This one is for listening, and without reading it all, you can clearly see that there is much that can inspire some of the perspectives that we're adopting in Belfast and Lurgan. Nothing very challenging. This is perhaps the most dense of the slides, and it does draw attention to how much at this level concentrates on giving people confidence in being able to speak on a range of different topics, some of which they've already learned. Nursery rhymes I hesitate over. Reading, again, only two major points, but things that complement the work done with oral skills of listening and reading. Again, it's very important to have a structured approach to this aspect with lots of repetition. Finally, as with reading, so too some copying activities where people have already encountered language, where they have grown in confidence with understanding what they hear for listening and then speaking and reading. This slide draws attention to some of the options for progression from pre-ESOL. Some will go to local colleges, others may enter employment or some sort of work placement, and then there are those who can benefit from Embrace NI. This is a challenge to yourself. Look at how can-do statements are being used by entering the phrase can do plus different countries. And like myself, I hope you will come up with some things that will help your own teaching. I conclude as ever with a slide to give some contact details where you can find out more about the work done on the Belfast programme and engage with the increasingly vibrant community of like-minded souls on Moodle. Goodbye.